You seen Minority Report?
With Timothy Cruz.
Yeah, our favorite. But his just that computer.
Yep.
I know that's got to be somewhere.
Yep.
In the world, and
the one where he touches it with his hands, and it's
my goal is to make that entire wall that, and it'll be your prompter for this whole episode. The whole wall
of like what's going on.
Yeah, just anything we want. Hot news will pop up.
Yeah.
Hot chicks will pop up. Hot coffee will pop up. Everything hot.
All things hot, nothing cold.
No cold.
Well, you know what? I'm surprised at, guys. I've been here obviously in January. This is now February.
January.
Cool.
Cool. Weather-wise, I was like, when were you here in January?
Yeah. Like, what's the current? I couldn't say. I do know a little bit about Fahrenheit, but what's it, Jim? 50? I'm gonna guess like 50.
57.
57.
Yeah, I would say 50.
That's not bad.
Our normal winter's 50 to 60, and then this one's just been a little wet.
No, wet.
A little more than a little bit wet.
We had like this storm. I don't know if it was El Nino's cousin or something, but he was angry, and there was like 70-mile-per-hour winds going crazy.
Well, it's just a good thing that climate change isn't real. All it is, people just forget how warm it used to be back in the day. You know what I'm saying, Jim?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like, look, dude. As soon as I heard we're putting woolly mammoths.
Winter is more a myth fabricated by companies. It never really happened. Like the whole
it's like
Christmas
Valentine's
thing.
Day.
Yeah, yeah. It was hot all year. In 30 years, when it's hot all year round, you know.
Yeah.
What about the woolly mammoth that we're throwing in Russia?
What do you mean?
I heard someone's making Jurassic Park in Russia.
Oh no.
With a woolly mammoth.
I don't know how far along we are, Jim. Maybe you can answer this with the cloning process. I know.
Oh no,
it's
pigs
and so forth.
I'm thinking you can do anything.
But with extinct, so you need a frozen tissue sample, so it'd be preserved.
And
right?
then
I
I
get
think,
the hair or something.
And then they put it in with DNA from like a close relative, so
like an elephant.
They're doing an Indian elephant.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then they're gonna see what kind of giant flora and shit can make it out there in Siberia.
So after the Cretaceous period, so the last like 65 million years, there are some fascinating mammals. I'm not gonna Balthicaria, like I'm blanking on, but it was a huge mammal. I'm talking the biggest one that's ever existed, and it was astonishing.
Is it like I don't think a sloth's a mammal, is it? I don't even know. But there was a giant sloth that was crazy.
Yeah. It starts with a B, and I'm going to butcher it, but it was absolutely massive, and everyone forgets because they just focus on dinosaurs. And there actually are some fascinating books on not just dinosaurs, but the marketing behind obviously making them popular in some of the museums and how it was a curio because like, wait a second, these large creatures existed before, which is absolutely true. But I'm just saying
they're just large chickens. They're not even that cool, right?
Everything was larger because of I think the higher level of oxygen. This is my breakfast right now. This energy drink, but there's creatures were bigger.
Well,
like in the Jurassic
we purely
period.
flew you down because you're a spokesman for the History Channel.
Oh,
that's
there
why
we go.
we're not talking fitness.
There we go.
We're talking dinosaurs.
Yeah, I was gonna say like two things. One of them is, are you aware that like most of the dinosaurs we think of as having existed didn't really exist? They were sort of different life stages of the same ones. It was all like, I discovered this, so I'm going to put my name on it, and that has to live forever, even though it was an adolescent whatever.
Yes. So I am acutely aware that a lot of things that people assume to be true, let's say about dinosaurs or anything like going far back, are either wrong, fabricated, or just a really good spin on it.
Yeah. And so speaking of the History Channel, is there like a caveman fitness version of this, like end of the dinosaurs, beginning of the rise of the two-legged mammals? Is there like a workout in there somewhere?
Yeah,
or
then we could throw in a little promo up in there.
Strongman.
Man, I mean, so back in the day when men were men, and they used to just do their lifting.
Now we're pansies with barbells.
You know what's funny? So Jim, I made this. I forget where I made this joke, but it's the truth that someone once said there's no weight classes in the jungle.
True.
And that person clearly has never been to the jungle. My father did grow up.
Yeah, because little things are getting eaten for sure.
Yeah.
My father did grow up legitimately in the jungle. One, it would be incredibly hot. The high prevalence of mosquitoes would be unlike anything someone has fathomed.
Yeah.
Let's say your resistance to some of the things like what is it, dengue fever, like malaria, all those sorts of things are just
dengue
atrocious.
fever.
Yeah, is
that real?
Yeah. Jim, give the rundown of what it is.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what the symptoms are. I just know
this
that
is 50% facts, dude. Don't come at us like that.
That's why I came in just vibing, right?
I had a new name today.
What?
That we're 50% mama boys.
Oh, I like
That's kinda
that.
cute,
I like
right?
that. I do like that. we had that cult following. Okay,
know.
there's but I was gonna say, Mike, that just on that, like, there's no weight classes and so forth. I love that powerlifting mantra.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? That
I do
people
too.
have.
That's how I live my
What they say.
life. I say that in the mirror to myself every day. I'm holding my belly fat.
Like that is something basically the heavyweights would say to make themselves feel better. But in an I think the kernel of what that individual is obviously attempting to say is that in a no holds bar scenario, weight classes wouldn't matter. We're simply looking at the strongest, but that's not what makes sports interesting. Like in MMA, I like watching 145, 155 fighters. If they're to fight against a super heavyweight, there's if they're equally skilled in their division, so they're both champs, there's like a 0% chance.
I don't want to play devil's advocate, but I did kind of, and I know you did too, like early MMA, where it's just anybody, where there was no weight classes.
Royce Gracie,
but the issue is, you're right, that the sports are too advanced and too specialized to now do that because someone's going to die.
Yeah.
But hypothetically, I do like no weight classes, and I think I agree with you. And the other thing that those people live by is that their goal, and this is like the positive end of it, or at least the part that I can semi-relate to, is that their ultimate goal is just that I got into lifting to be the strongest I can. I didn't get into lifting to play the scores game. And so there's a piece of that I enjoy as well. But if you want to be a competitor, you got to play a sport. And so the no weight classes is not a sport. Now you're just more of like a show.
And it's always interesting when someone will say something that biases wherever they are.
Of course.
Meaning that if you're a super heavyweight and thus there'd be no coefficients, you would want that. But I think what's almost more interesting, and this is the counter argument to that if you look at a population distribution, a standardized distribution, there's more people that would be competing in the 83 kilo class. So you actually, the talent pool of people that would be competing at that weight class
is
would
actually
be
more
significantly higher.
Yeah.
So even though your total's not higher, your level of competition would be. And that's why, speaking about MMA, there's a lot of heavyweight fighters, Jim, that would do exceptionally well that didn't have the basics, like the footwork, the time, because they had just KO power, whereas a 125, 135 has to be so skilled in so many positions because there's so much competition.
Yeah, the only difference is the UFC's heavyweights, 220? Which on the bell curve is probably more likely than when super heavyweight and powerlifting.
How many 308?
I think 309. You have to weigh 309, which is so rare. You're right though, and you find that easily in the tested federations. It gets a little bit more skewed when you go untested, obviously, because body tissue, you can just like build more body tissue and shit. Because the 83 kilo and the 93, I don't even know what it is anymore, or 83, 90,
83,
181 and 198 pounds are like two of the most competitive in the USAPL now. And it makes sense.
So they do 198 in USAPL instead of 93 kilos like the IPS, which is like 205.
So they switched back.
Yeah, they switched back to the other American stuff, which I don't mind. One, freedom mutants. Fuck you, Omar. Two, the rest of our federations use it. So I like it more that you can compare now the WRPF and these other feds because the weight classes are the exact same.
You know what I was going to say is that we were having this conversation, Jim, at dinner the other day. Won't list the prolific powerlifter that in our time was super popular, very notable, someone not from the U.S., but one of the all-time greats. But just the idea how would we say this, transient the nature of lifting is, that we don't have that legacy and that established kind of mythos, shared mythos, so that we all agree on these set people who have done things. And we don't have places for them where they're almost like early MMA fighters where they're now being forgotten, even though what they did paved the way for the powerlifters of 2023. Case in point, if you are a prominent 2015 powerlifter, and most of those were on the untested side, your social currency is at an all-time low.
Or not even social, like within
your
sporting legacy, all of
it.
That is sad, and maybe I'm going to sound like the old guy, but I find that that's happening everywhere. And maybe it is you motherfucking Zoomers.
In lifting, Mike, you think? Or
no, basketball.
Oh, really?
I feel like everywhere is starting to like kind of throw shade at the old generations, where the Jordan LeBron arguments, obviously like the most popular one that we can do this with, but you can do the John Hack, Ed Cohn, we can do whatever the fuck we want, but basketball is obviously more prevalent worldwide, or Messi, Pele, doesn't really matter. Like those debates should be fun, because there is no answer and the answer doesn't matter. And then two, like you can't just say like, oh, LeBron's born in the 60s, he crushes everybody, it doesn't count that way.
You have to compare it to the competition.
And some of these newer lifters are, I assume newer lifters also don't know who Ed Cohn is, although I don't talk to a bunch of 21-year-old lifters that much. But basketball players, I've heard interviews that kind of talk that way. Like, oh, dude, Magic wasn't even that good. I'm like, dude, what Magic did for the league and the sport, like, you literally wouldn't be there. Yeah. Hindsight to that, there are some people that do understand. Where shout out to our boy Pug. I was having dinner with Pug, and we talk a lot of shit together. And I was talking shit, and they're all trying to get me come back and do a meet. They're like, dude, Mike, you could probably be top 5, top 10 again if you go hard. I'm like, I probably could, but I probably couldn't. And they were making fun of me for the shit we did, right? Because we did keto and we did West Side, and I had to do everything because there was nothing else out there in this world.
You paved the way for them.
And Pug jokingly said that. He's like, dude, if you started training the way I started training, you'd probably be hella strong now. I'm like, yeah, you dumb bitch. Like, I had to crawl so you can sprint out here. And Pug is incredibly strong and smart and understands programming. But, like, we had to fiddle. And I think it was the last time we talked to you and Eric. I don't know if it was this studio or the past studio.
It was the last one, yeah.
Yeah, I was risen at Eric a little bit because he mentioned how he used to program basically West Side style lifting for Bryce Lewis and his lifters. And I was like, dude, I know you're so bad or something. And he's like, dude, we didn't know either. Like, I was like, yeah, I know, I'm kidding, but like none of us knew. You took the tools you knew and then tried to manipulate them, but we didn't know about different styles of periodization that worked or how much frequency we could handle.
No, 100%.
But the new kids aren't even looking back at that because you have to look back at it to learn.
So I will say this. I believe in the youth of the future.
I don't.
I believe the children are our future.
Because I genuinely, in that it's they're being through like coercion via social media, things like, you know, whatever, like it doesn't matter what platform, but basically everyone's fighting over the same shared legacy, which is history, how we remember it. And, you know, it has been said that history's written by the victors, but also
that's why we winning, baby. That's why we don't lose.
As humans, it's basically our collective agreement of what transpired in the past. And so it becomes more important if someone wants to cement their place. You're fighting over the same real estate because there's only so many people that can be in the conversation.
Not everyone can win.
So when we talk about LeBron, it's a conversation of who's the GOAT, right? Like between him or MJ, there could theoretically only be one MJ, one LeBron. Who is the GOAT?
Can I make an argument or a side note? How much people use GOAT or GOATed nowadays, where it
annoys the shit out of me, to be honest.
Well, like the term is whatever, but they're literally using it wrong, right? It stands for the greatest of all time, and they use it when they say everyone.
Yeah.
Like, oh, Kevin Durant's GOAT. Oh, Kobe's GOAT. I'm like, no, there's one.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No,
yeah, there's fucking one. My bad. Go ahead.
No, but
it's like Highlander.
There
could be only one.
You know what my favorite part about that, Jim, and we're just going to go off on that tangent, because Highlander's an iconic film that, like, in my personal opinion, in terms of cinema, and it's an action film, there are parts that are really good. Like the opening scene, Jim, where they're in the garage and the lightning and the lights go out and that battle, epic. The idea that each is, through some reason they can't even explain, are attracted to one another and they must battle for supremacy. Cool in theory. My favorite was Sean Connery, who's what? He's Welsh?
Yeah.
Right. And the guy who plays, I'm blanking on his name. Jim, do you remember? Lead actor of Highlander, who was Raiden in Mortal Kombat. He's Belgian. I believe he's Belgian.
Lambert?
Yes, Christopher Lambert. Thank you. So he's Belgian, and so when he speaks English, he has that accent. But he's supposed to be Scottish. So this is, now we're doing a lot of different regions here.
Yeah.
But he's supposed to be Scottish, and Sean Connery's supposed to be Spanish, right?
Yes.
Yes. And so
how bad is his accent?
So Christopher Lambert putting on the Scottish accent, not great, but like kind of acceptable. Sean, despite being Welsh, sounds a lot more in that pocket. But he's supposed to be a Spanish person. And the line he says to Christopher Lambert, I believe while they're like fishing or something, he's like, "Tell me of this land of Scotland, for I know not of its ways." And he says that, and Christopher Lambert, he's speaking with his like Belgian, like French accent. He's like, "Scotland," and he starts talking about it. I'm like, bro, this is such funny casting.
So
you know when you think about it?
So fucked.
Should have flipped that around.
The casting, what were they thinking?
I don't have any idea. We want to make money. We have Sean Connery. Let's put him somewhere. Well, he doesn't like last the whole film, right? It's been a long time since I've seen it.
No, he gets so spoiler. Sean does not make it to the end.
Yeah, this movie's 40 years old. You guys can fucking deal with the spoilers.
I wanted to watch it. I was gonna say, interestingly enough, another iconic film for all the wrong reasons that he was in. Do you remember Zardoz?
Yeah.
With that outfit, thank you. Okay,
yes.
So I think it takes place, I could be wrong. Again, this is 50% facts. I think it takes place around 2023. So they're trying to extrapolate 40 or 50 years from now. I think it's like something around here, guys.
What's he wearing?
Oh, it's hot.
It's essentially like a loincloth.
Yeah,
and shit.
but it's
we
a
kinda
good
went
look.
backwards?
And he has a braided hair that he wears to one side, long hair. Has the
Kinda like
full,
a Jedi braid type deal.
No, it's
You
full
missed,
on.
Oh,
No,
you
it's
missed my
full on.
Jedi braid era.
So I saw it a bit. What year is it? 2293. Oh, 22.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so I remember 2290. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
thought like 2023.
yeah.
So that's even funnier because they are.
Do we regress kind of like a Wall-E type deal?
So an interesting part about trying to extrapolate into like if you actually do hard science fiction is that we can't correctly anticipate the future technological innovations, and you only have to take a historical look. So if you look at like 1920, 1915, 1970, what they predicted would be the biggest new technological innovations.
Yeah.
They're always wrong. 1920 flying cars, whatever the
Yeah,
case
well,
might be.
then we were time traveling. Isn't back to
That's it right there. That's the
That's kind of
outfit.
hot. That guy with a harder mustache and a little more muscle might be you.
So I'm gonna say this about
That's
Sean.
a honk.
So let's be clear. Sean said some very like regressive things, which is why
He
he
did.
got
Yeah.
sat out.
Yeah.
So
He
I'm not
did.
condoning it. But one thing I will say, interesting little factoid that's relevant here, and Jim, I think you know this. He did some amateur bodybuilding, and he actually looked good. You remember that?
Yeah, he did- he was like-
Connery?
no, legit.
Or
yeah, he
whatever
was
that
like
naked
Mr.
guy is.
Mr. Universe or
Yeah,
something
like
like
in
that.
that-
Back
I don't
when
know. Yeah.
and when it was just people who worked out.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Yeah, no, and he
pretty
actually
cool.
looks solid. Which is
Also,
cool.
he's filling that loincloth in
That's
quite
Sean
well. Really
Connery?
special way. Yes,
Yeah.
that's Sean Connery.
I didn't know you so hairy.
I would say it didn't. The contour of his loincloth is not traditionally what I would assume genitals in a loincloth would look like. So I'm not trying to imply there's padding.
Are you
Jim.
saying
Now
you've
you can
never
see his
done?
face.
You've never dressed up for funsies?
You can see his face here.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah,
wild look.
that's not really the
I like
outfit.
the gun. I like the gun to one side too. Like,
yeah, who are
you
you
got those
shooting?
close?
Yeah, who are you shooting?
His gun's dressing to one side.
They took the photo and they said that's it. That's the one.
This is the one. A million years ago, I was assistant manager of a audio video store. I want to say it was a record store that had VHS tapes, and this was a film that we rented all the time.
So, Jim, let me just say, man, one of the things I respect about you, and I'm being serious in a rare moment here, is that you take an interest in the details, and it is having attention to detail that I think matters in a lot of things. Either like the whole setup here, the technical component, but also those considerations, they really do matter. I think sometimes people become, when it comes to content creation, people will use that as a limiting barrier or belief to getting into it, and they'll think the next logical leap they'll need for their content to go, in quotations, next level is a technical innovation. So I'm not saying that, but having care to each component is important. That's an underrated. Like even these, like I'm not joking. Like these chairs are comfy. You know what I mean? Like this studio sets a vibe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he set this whole thing up.
Yeah.
He chose all the decor. He did everything. And same with like, the gym too was obviously collaborative, but I agree with you. But opposite of that too, we're like a dichotomy where content creators or wannabe entrepreneurs will think that stuff's the limiting factor, but then also always take the easy route. Not always, but you know what I mean? Like they'll make cheap clothes, they'll make a cheap gym, they'll make a cheap podcast, and like, you know what I mean? It's like kind of split half and half.
So the question, there's a lot of kids now that'll ask me like, hey, like, what should I do if I want to this and that? And I'll say,
I want to be a male stripper.
Yeah, I'm like, hey, that dancing takes some skill. You know what I'm saying?
Practice,
Pop, lock,
practice.
And the question I ask them, because the question they're really asking is how to become famous.
Right.
And the better question they should ask is why do they want to be famous? Not if they did that examination, they would probably cease the intent of what they're trying to do, which is like to go through, they want the validation, which is totally normal in this modern social media age.
I also like validation.
But Mike, the question I ask them, which is the far better question, and once they have that answered, I think they'll become unstoppable in terms of being a long-term content creator, and it's the uncomfortable one, is why should people follow you? Why should people listen to you? What separates you from everyone else?
What's your skill set?
Right?
Me and Bart talk about this a lot, and I haven't put it together perfectly yet to display it to the world, but you guys will understand the concept and might help me build it. But basically, how we all began is we either had a skill, a talent, or a hobby, and we thought, wow, we should share what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Jim decided to share the team aspect and geared lifting aspect that wasn't being shared on the internet.
Yep.
You and I were coaches, basically, and we're like, oh, we have some knowledge that maybe the world doesn't have. How can I reach the most amount of ears with the skills and coaching that I'm already doing? Where nowadays, people will look just like that. How can I receive validation? And so we began to film our coaching, and we began to film our day-to-day lifting. I lifted weights for 10 years, then I decided to film it. I coached for 4 years, decided to film it. Where they will see, okay, what is getting views and validation on the internet? What is getting that clout? Oh, lifting? Maybe I'll try lifting. And then they'll begin to lift. Like it's such reverse of processes.
And the folks who were lifting, 10 years ago are now saying, "Oh, I want to try BJJ, or I want to run, or I want to do whatever."
Yeah, not a lot last.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Omar's taking up tap dancing.
And
He's
I think
giving up lifting as well.
what do you think about these shoes right here? I like how I was like stretching out. My knee was feeling achy as hell.
We can pull the table this way. You put your feet up if you want.
No, we're great.
I put
man.
my feet on the kitchen table. It is my kitchen table, but I got flamed by Omar and Kyle this morning.
But what?
My feet on the kitchen table.
Man, you had them dogs out.
The dogs are out,
just
baby.
like out, and like they weren't yellow, but they're like pink because like they were like touching the floor. And they just and Kyle was just looking at them. We're just talking about because I was talking the origin.
What are you doing?
We're talking about the neurological connection between foot fetishes. Actually, we're pretty intellectual at 8 a.m.
So Jim, you could look this up because we're going 50% facts mode here. But I remember this is that I think people have different inclinations, proclivities.
People are sexually attracted to other things. That's what you're getting with. Stop using big words, dude. They're pervs.
With fetishes, it's completely fine. But I read somewhere that when it comes to feet fetishes, that it actually is due to basically the way the brain's wired, the sensory organs, and the way that it's compiled is that your genitals are actually close to your feet, and sometimes
I'm a size 12 in both.
Is that
some people are closer to their feet than others?
It's a bleed over
Yeah.
that crosses over, and so it's wider in the brain, so they have the same response as it is to like seeing genitals. So it's not just like because like some it's either like social condition,
and they're also covered up
personal.
a lot. They're covered up in modern age, so they might be a little mysterious.
And
what do them things look like under those
mysterious.
Hanes socks?
So
Most people have ugly feet, though.
So I don't want to get into it.
No,
but,
I
like,
want to get into it.
I think certain body parts can be I don't want to say like naturally aesthetic, but I think feet are gnarly.
Sure,
personally,
but foot fetishes are the most common fetish.
Yeah, and I think because of the way it's white, like Jim, I want you to look this thing up.
Do you really want me to look this up?
Just about because
incognito.
I've been spitting
no
so
shit.
No,
right?
Jim, I've been spitting so much just because I know we're just.
I have the second
on
one
you.
for you.
Right.
I have the second
Go.
one for you. So
Go.
some people, I believe, are into human waste, and sometimes they like it on their chest. How related is that to my neurological? That my bum hole is close to my pee hole.
Number
or something?
ones and number twos.
I guess both, really, because they do. You're correct. I wonder if those fetishes are connected, or if they only like one or the other. Like, is there someone that's like, yeah, pee on me, ew, poop, or if they're like, ew, poop on me, ew, pee pee.
So man, this one is even harder to envision because I think
only done it twice. You're not that experienced.
Once, and then I wasn't sure, so I'm like, let's do it again. But I was gonna say that I think so. My nose is very sensitive to odors, and so any bad odor. So it's weird for me where bad odors are 10 times worse. My reaction. Pleasurable odors are like they smell nice, but a bad odor, like as an example, this is really sad. But so in Toronto, we have a lot of raccoons, and so for some reason behind our house that we were renting, there's a main street, and so there's a lot of businesses, and so raccoons would go dumpster diving, and I think a lot of those businesses would poison their garbage, and so raccoons then would come into our backyard because it's like pretty spacious, and they go underneath the deck. Anyways, one day it was a very faint smell. And I had to bring my brother out, who does have a good sense of smell, and he had to smell around. I was like, "Man, something smells."
Your brother's
off.
a bloodhound,
and he's more accurate. He's just that guy. He has attention once again to detail. So he's a musician. He could smell something and define it. He could smell like the spices that we'll use or whatnot. He could try a food sample, and he'll accurately be able. Whereas I just know it's like it's off. I know it's like a danger signal in my head.
Yeah.
So anyways, all that to say, the long story is that bad smells smell really bad. I can't.
You don't want to get pooped on.
I can't even think about that.
What with your superpower of smell? Do you find weird?
It's not even a good one though, because it's binary. It's not like good, bad. It's not. I'm not like,
yeah.
oh, that's a hint of mahogany. It's just like it's like a
because good smells are semi-subjective, right? Like there's some weird shit that I kind of like the smell of. Like I don't mind skunk. I don't mind gasoline. Some people that throws them way off. Like little things like that. I kind of like burnt metal and type shit when we're doing construction or burnt wood. Like I love some of that. Some people hate that.
The burnt wood sometimes, if it's not like really charred, kind of has an incense smell.
Yeah,
I
like that. Or same with the metal. Like when we're ripping off the metal things, I kind of like that smell.
Jim,
probably
I
toxic,
love
but
incense. Incense. And then
Kyle hates it. I'll be lighting it in my room sometimes, and it'll get the whole upper floor going.
So I grew up with incense. The other one is that I grew up in a household where there was smoke. And this
cigarettes?
is a big one. I think
I like cigarette smoke too, and no one smoked.
Yeah.
Really?
I'll go to Vegas. And I kind of like. I mean, Mom smoked before my sister was born, and then some of my aunts and uncles and shit. But I saw them once every 2 years.
I always kind of, in my mind, I always kind of go to like being a kid in a bowling alley.
Yeah.
Right.
I go to a kid in Vegas.
Jim, they
Dad
had
gambled a little bit. I like cigarette smokes.
We grew up in this era too. I think they stopped it in Toronto. Let's say in the '90s, where they had a smoking and a non-smoking
for
section.
sure.
We would actually go into the non-smoking section,
Or even airplanes.
Yeah.
How dumb is the non-smoking section in a restaurant?
Yeah.
Because it's literally like
just
booth back to back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you're not stopping. A hotel kind of makes sense, right? Because at least you're in a room.
Yeah.
But airplanes, remember, there's ash fucking trays.
Yeah.
Like, that's the wildest concept nowadays because they're not there anymore.
Yeah, and now that they've kind of replaced everything, but for a long time they still had them.
Yeah, it's
you know?
so random.
Jim, check me now. Have you looked it up? Because I've been spitting so many different things.
Okay.
I want
to be accurate about
I'm
your...
completely fine with being wrong. I want to be checked with at least one thing.
Okay, so I'm on healthline.com.
Thank
and
you.
We will.
And they like to talk
we'll
about
link
feet?
this. They said foot fetish is common. It's the mainstream sexual kink.
Yep.
Is more commonly talked about and understood than other types of fetishes.
Sure.
One study found that fetishes related to the human body parts were the most prevalent. What was to say? One study found that fetishes related to human body parts were the most prevalent fetishes.
Sure.
Foot fetishes or podophilia accounted for almost.
Podophilia is not a good name. Let's not use that one.
Yeah, it could also be like really, really, really liking podcasts. So,
just fucking jerking off to me right now.
yeah, almost 50% of the preferences of this group accounted for was foot fetishes. Why do people like feet? This is an important question.
Okay.
Just like clothing preferences or music styles, sexual kinks vary, in case you didn't know.
Yeah.
Every person is attracted to or even repelled by things others might consider mundane. So it's not clear what it is about feet that's appealing, but a few theories have been offered to explain why some people are just drawn to feet.
Keep going, Jim.
And foot play.
Validate me.
Okay, so first one is biology. Your feet are covered with nerve endings, and the nerve endings equal greater, often more intense sensations. So this sort of ties into your theory. So tickling, rubbing, and massaging may all feel extremely better on feet than they do other places. And that could be a proximity to the groinal region. This one I didn't see coming. The humiliation aspect. One psychological element of a foot fetish is humiliation. Feet are often considered below people. That is, some people think of feet as a lowly body part. That sets up a dynamic some people find appealing.
No,
they like to feel lower
is a huge fetish
than their partner.
Not that I would know.
They enjoy having their
Tell
feet.
me I have a small cock.
Having your feet on their body as a form of power play or being put in their place. And then I don't know how this one's not related. Domination aspect. Submission and domination is a power play for some couples. Feet are just one part of the structure. If your partner has a foot fetish, they may want you to treat them like a human footrest.
Yeah.
We could get somebody to come in and
call me Rufus.
Yeah.
Them dogs.
That they find satisfaction in letting you have domination over them so they can worship at your feet.
That's good.
Okay.
That's sex ed of the.
So I'll say this. I wasn't trying to kink shame. Is that my point of bringing up different body parts is that I feel that some are just like more aesthetic.
Yeah.
Like in terms of like shape.
What about
function.
hands?
So I'll put it this way. Like
some people are like into hands, but not like sexually. But
I'll put it this way. Hands like nice, well-formed hands.
Yeah.
That's cool. It's like, okay, like the proportions, the symmetry.
Yeah.
There's a reason why where they have like hand models to put certain things down.
Yeah.
Whereas like, let's face it, like I don't know if it's our shoes or whatnot. Those things are mangled. I don't care who you like. They're turned like in and like bunions and like.
You see the picture of LeBron?
Yeah,
like his pinky toes like on the top of his foot.
No, dude, it's like,
and like I get it. Like you've literally been squished into like shoes your entire life, and you're like pushing hard against the edge. Like my feet were way worse when I played basketball than now.
Yeah,
because you're just in them so long, and there's so much pressure, and you're tied hella tight.
We'll pivot out of this conversation, but let me give it a TMI. But like I think about like the small of the back. Like something like the neckline of like a woman,
or even like little things, right? Like
neck down. I'm not even talking cleavage.
Or like
all
quads. Like I find developed quads attractive, but like that's probably because then they're athletic. You know, they like there's more evolutionary.
It could be a marker towards something else.
Yeah, you're healthy. That's what like the big booby thing is, right? Because then a mama's ready good to give babies, right?
Isn't that a thing? Like I think posture as an example is cool.
Yeah, because it might lead to confidence. It might lead to confidence and personality.
Yeah. So
all right,
there's
dating
something for
tips with Dr. Love.
Yeah, there's some for everyone. So, okay.
Dr.
So
Canada
I
Love.
was on the 50% not facts then. I do like what I am comfortable on this podcast though. I do like it because it's just a chill conversation. It's just spitting things out. I'm like, I'm probably wrong.
No, yeah, that's
Yeah.
we got to fail safe back here.
Every time I think about changing the name of this podcast, I come back to the fact that it just works
It's
too
a safety net.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It works too well.
But there's definitely truths in there. You know, because
Yeah.
if you're 50% incorrect, you got to be 50% correct.
Well, there is the gray area of being neither correct or incorrect because the answer could be more complicated. Than
That's where we
and
live.
I think that's the
fun of it.
Yeah, the gray area.
That's where we live. There's more than 100% to ourselves.
Now, Mike, they're probably wondering, Jim, they went off on a tangent. They come back. I'm gonna finish.
Yeah,
off
whip
on
her
the
around.
Point. The point, because there was something where we got to about the legacy within different places, and then we're all fighting over the shared historical perspective that is the cultural memory of what occurred. And so I think it always is to the benefit of whatever the next generation is to erase if they care and they're trying to cement their own legacy. So they're vying for power.
Yeah.
And that's okay and it's understandable. But I think what's important is in our modern era now with, all the video stuff, all the data that is tracked and whatnot, there's numbers. And I wonder 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, none of this will probably matter. But what I'm saying is that there's history that when you remember 20 years from when it occurred and then 100 years, then 500 years, and those change. So someone like an Ed Cohen, as an example, in 30 years might become irrelevant. I don't mean any shade against him. I think I do think he is one of the GOATs. But 100 years from now, when people are looking back and they look at pioneers, so like Eugene Sandow,
Right.
Eugene was not popular in the 60s or 70s, right? At that time, we had the golden era coming back, the silver age. So we had many other guys like John Grimmick and so on and so forth, Steve Reeves. So his cultural currency at that time.
Right.
But then people start doing a deep dive, and now Eugene Sandow, if we had to trend his popularity
he's
over the
the
last
guy.
120 years, he's probably more popular now than he has been in 120 years.
That is funny. Even
it's
a Tommy
interesting.
Kono,
Yes.
is barely spoken about, but that dude's such a gangster.
Yes.
And so maybe 20 years from now when we start to undig more stuff, Tommy will get a little bit more love in general. But what he did is I don't even know what to compare him to, because he did so much for so many sports.
Yeah, and I think too that if you're coming up in a sport and you really don't have the level of talent or the comparability to put yourself on a Mount Rushmore of a particular sport, then your goal should be to blow up that Mount Rushmore in some way and just restart a new era of whatever. And I think that actually has naturally happened because the people who are competing now in the mainstream don't compete the way Ed did at the beginning of his career or the end of his career.
Yeah, powerlifting just such a different idea because it's so fragmented into eras, right? With an Ed Cohen era, then a West Side era, and then kind of a whatever era, I guess a Dan Green era, and then now more of a USAPL seems to be majority of, or even IPF with the forklifter. There's a lot of more attention there, and so the sport is so varied where you can't really compare it to basketball. There was a point with no 3-point line, but the differences are still nothing compared to powerlifting. There've literally been different sports every 10 years.
Yeah.
One thing I'll say, Jim, I think what's liberating about that notion that who writes history, what will be history, is that when people are always trying to vie once again for legacy, the intention of what you're doing then is skewed towards one direction, which is completely fine. But the question they have to ask is, if it doesn't happen that way, then would you be satisfied with what you did, your contributions, the reasons behind it? And I think far more enriching is what Mike was alluding to in the pursuit thereof, in the sense that it's sequential. History is actually sequential. So you won't be remembered, but what you did will hopefully in some tangible way impact and improve the next generation. What was the example you were giving? So what you said with Pug.
Yeah.
And this is true in so many different disciplines. We are essentially, the way I define us, would be pioneers in the space, in the social media lifting space.
Yeah.
And also programming where everything coalesced together. You brought up Eric Helms, where even the research is far stronger. Why? Because now we have tens of thousands of lifters. We have hundreds of coaches that could all communicate with one another. And so what's percolating up is something closer to the approximation of truth. And so you need people in there to do that process
Right.
to lead the next generation that then takes for granted if it fits your macros, RP, single work.
Even that, bro. You
all
look
those sorts
around
of
like
things.
I remember when you and I were talking about it. There's probably fucking 20 people on the internet talking about macros.
Yep.
And then now you go to every single TikToker, besides some that are way out there, like a carnivore or something. And the majority of people giving fitness information are talking about macros, and it's just a well-known, normal occurrence.
Yeah.
Where literally 7 years ago,
Yeah.
there was a handful of people talking about macronutrients and like food as energy and like how it actually works.
And I think I'm very satisfied with I'll just speak for myself, like with like my contribution in the space, like what occurred, and that's why I do have a lot of hope. I always have hope in the future. The only thing that gives a slight pause is not them. It's that when a space gets bigger, naturally things get incentivized monetarily. And when and that's why someone said that, and it's absolutely true. It actually was Mike Tornabenny, Don Mazzetti. He was on a podcast, and he
Mike's
said
a smart cat.
No, Mike is clearly so
He's
that's
a very smart cat.
He said that, which I could tell.
This is bro science for those out there.
He's someone who's a creator and he's an artist, and that's the distinction. There's business-minded folks, and then there's artists. And I think we would identify more on the artist side, the artistry of it. But he was saying, so what he said about TikTok, which is 100% true, and this isn't a charge against it. There will be the next TikTok. So that's what I want to be clear. We're like, yeah, TikTok's right, like whatever, like it's owned by like this government. I'm like, bro, they're all like, it's a natural extension of what has been occurring on Instagram, on YouTube. But what I was going to say, on YouTube, theoretically, years ago, it's possible to create, and what we created and what I'm proud of is our own new niche that then people have taken, expanded, improvised on that didn't exist before. What TikTok primarily focuses on is echoing what someone else does.
Yeah.
And there'll be things, and you don't believe for a second that this won't happen, that essentially musical trends, that then there'll be companies that incentivize once again.
Sure.
TikTok or whatnot, where it's like, hey, this kid has the latest single, make this sound trending.
For sure.
You have to use that sound to be popular, so everyone's just copying one another.
Right.
It's an iteration of an iteration. And there's no creativity.
Yeah,
there's no
rewards
innovation.
lack of creativity.
Yeah, and
that's literally the definition of it. Trends.
Yeah. There's no autonomous thought being put into place, and that's the part that's concerning is the willingness for conformity. And I even see it in, so as a big music fan, you see modern musical artists and the intersection. One of my favorite shows of the modern era, last 20 years, is actually Donald Glover's Atlanta.
Oh yeah, I've heard it's good. I've never watched it.
So I think it's exceptional because it's a critique on just living in modern culture. Obviously, the Black lived experience, and then the music industry, all these intersections. But he takes on basically in very clever ways corporatism and the idea that like the modern artist, like you can't just be an artist. You're actually a marketer. You're a business-minded person. Like let's take what's her name? Hottie, Megan Thee Stallion.
Oh yeah.
Where she has an example, and she's just one of many. But like you do like the Hottie sauce, the Popeye integration, and it's not about obviously the music anymore, but everyone because you're incentivized to go along to get along. It's all about being a corporate shill. Versus, like, let me take as an example. I'm not even a Pearl Jam fan, okay? But when they said "fuck Ticketmaster," like that meant something. When those bands, like Faith No More, as an example, and it was across the spectrum. That's why, like, hip hop had a lot of people that were like Tribe Called Quest. Like, they were like socially conscious, like really good stuff. And then what percolated to the top and what was put forth, like years later. But anyways, like Faith No More, where the guy's like flopping on stage when he's doing the performance. He doesn't want to perform. He doesn't want to be there. Like even like Nirvana. Like you listen, I'm just listening to like '90s artists. But you could go back. There was a sense of understanding that they had to keep their music ideologically pure. Of course, they would do certain things and like whatnot, like and they'll sell tickets. But there's a clip, and again, I'm not even a big Nirvana fan. I'm just bringing up like modern big examples people would get because we could get it in a jazz. But there was an interview with Kurt Cobain where he's talking about the price of the tickets, and they wanted to make the tickets affordable for their audience, which is now an unheard of idea. Yeah. And he heard how much Madonna was charging for her tour at the time, which was probably like 3 times what they were charging. And let's be clear, they were massive at the time. They could have charged whatever. And they said, man, that's a ripoff.
Yeah.
Imagine
I can't have my core audience watch me, so why am I going on tour?
Yeah. And so imagine an artist these days that would be incredibly popular, but also a consumer focus or fan focus,
Yeah.
where they care about their audience, and that just doesn't happen.
Yeah,
They're
it's
now
hard.
all plants, which is not all of them. I should
Yeah,
say
yeah,
They're
yeah.
like guys like Thundercat. Like there are
Yeah,
a bunch of
Thundercat's
artists
cool.
that are doing cool things, but I'm saying the system rewards compliance.
But
and
then,
that,
it just gets complicated from there, right? Because their only way to make money is tour now, because
Yes.
they're getting fucked by bigger corporations
100%.
and shit. So it does get complicated. But I highly agree with the lack of creativity, although their job title is still a content creator.
Yeah.
But because of the systems, you can't always blame them in particular.
No.
Because the systems, reward you for being not individual.
Yeah, and I like using the same vocabulary across everything.
Yeah.
People talk about things all the same way, all the same words.
It's just regurgitation.
It's annoying. It's like grating even to hear the same, oh, I'm loving whatever, this new makeup shit that I got for free.
The same 5 books, the same 5 films that I was talking about.
Yeah, it's annoying. And there's no, where's the individuality that everything else was based on, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I feel like it's like the middle ground of the daily creator is there, and then if you could get to the top somehow, whatever that looks like, then maybe you can be individual and win. Like I was talking to Omar about Lil Uzi Vert, just to choose a pop name, and I wasn't a fan before because his music kind of all sounded the same, but recently he's come out with some like kind of experimental shit that's very, very different, and I kind of like it, but I almost just like it because he's doing it and he's being himself and having fun with his music versus every other hip-hop artist or whatever type of pop artist now just using the exact same tones, the exact same synth, the exact same flow.
And we can analyze it musically too. We could go down that path. And there's several channels. So there's a guy called Rick Beato. He has a channel. He's a good music teacher. And so you'll say like, oh, like you hear this chord, so we're doing like a 2-5-1 or whatever, like the progression. But there's been a narrowing in terms of the chord progressions and permutations and song structures. The innovation in quotations going on right now is really in production. But in terms of like, there are hits from the 60s, 70s,
way
80s,
more complicated.
and that people were willing to listen to.
Yeah.
Right? Like you have Weather Report example. They had that song Birdland. That song in 2022 would never be as popular, or 2023 now, just because people have been conditioned to think less. It's almost like the most analogous thing I could use is that if you use your own thinking, your own ears, you'll pick up on things you might not be able to identify, and that's just a language to say like, oh, there's a 13th note in there, or whatever, or it's an add this, or it's a suspend, or like whatever. That's the language of communicating what you're hearing. But if you listen enough, you could be like, oh, that's a complex emotion. It's kind of melancholic, but there's a hint of hope at the end, whatever.
Yeah,
But
you don't have to know the language of music, and that's the
No.
beauty of music.
No, it's an experience.
Yeah.
And I think the most analogous thing I could liken it to is we all now have a spell check on our phones. And when it's turned off and people attempt to spell, their spelling is worse than it was before they had spell check.
Yeah.
Because that is basically our handicap with like the wheels on it that allow and assist us just to basically blitz through things. And so it's the same idea that things are formulaic when it comes, and because I care a lot about music, is that I don't think that corporations, which have all the power now, right? They had that from the MTV. I think MTV, it's always been there, but even the inception of MTV, a video killed the radio star and so on and so forth, where it became about a look and a feel and an attitude, which is like theoretically, because it's part of the experience, is cool.
Yeah, because it could potentially add to the storytelling, right?
Yes.
So it could add to the story, but when it's scaled up,
Yeah.
this is where we end up.
And there's a theatrical component to it, but I do wonder, and what I do like is some of the modern artists that are trying to shoe some of these like rigid structures, because they feel it, an artist's natural inclination, like a Stanislaw Lem in his book, the Hospital of the Transfiguration. He has a line where he says, which is an amazing line. He said, a reader about books. He said, a reader reads to escape, a writer writes for redemption. And so an artist, the general concept with an artist is they're trying to explore themselves, communicate an idea. So if you're truly an artist, you'll kind of bristle against some of these things being put down on you. So you do see some artists doing that. There are even the popular ones, and you do see some great work still being done in cinema, even under the Hollywood kind of moniker.
Sure.
I think the best work is being done is independent cinema. But one thing I'll say quickly, and I want to kick it back over to you guys, I'll never forget this as an example where people, they'll listen to the aggregate and they haven't formed their own opinion on it. They'll see what Rotten Tomatoes says for a film or Metacritic. I'll never forget this.
Speaking of Rotten Tomatoes,
Who pays the critics?
I don't know, but I was just looking up, and I don't know cinematically. That's where movies to me are much different than music or clothes or anything else. Where I literally am a consumer. When we're talking about not being a consumer, I am just with movies. I just want to be entertained. Like you know this, Jim.
Yeah.
I just want to sit down and numb my brain a little bit. I don't look at it any other way. I don't look at the shots, although I'm a YouTube creator. I don't listen to audio. I don't even look at the script. I don't give a fuck. Entertain me. So Remember the Titans, because emotionally, I think, in my childhood, is one of my favorite movies ever. And we were just talking about politics this morning. And so I was looking up the year that it takes place, that story. It's 1971, which is a whole different story, how wild that is. That that level of racism was like only 12 years from me being born. But that thing got like 60% on Rotten Tomatoes or some shit. That movie's dope.
So
fuck those bastards. And it was Disney. You think it would have gotten the corporate twisty love, So
this is why it pays to form your own opinion. But I always think a historical look can then inform the future if the ecosystem's the same and not dynamic. So in a marketplace setting, because things are constantly changing, it makes no sense to take a historical look. But in things like art, where we could take a look, how have critics historically performed in terms of predicting what the group consensus 50 years would be from then? What were the great films? And I'll give you an example. Just look up the Oscars Best Picture, even the nominees. So forget what won Best Picture, but 1939, like Citizen Kane and so on and so forth, like Gone with the Wind won, and fuck Gone with the Wind. But what was nominated and what now 80 years later people will regard as the best films from 1939. The top 10, maybe one of them's nominated. So what does that tell you about critics? And they habitually do this. I know this because growing up, I listened to a lot of rock as an example. Van Halen, Rolling Stone magazine, the premier magazine for musical critiques, said with Van Halen 1, which was highly innovative, Eddie Van Halen, R.I.P., his frenetic guitar playing, the double tapping, the wizardry he did, but also, honestly, he was a riff master and his rhythm playing was underrated. But anyways, nonetheless, the musical critic, who has no musical credentials, not that you necessarily need one to be a critic,
right? But it sure helps.
He said there's nothing new on this, and I think he gave it 2 out of 5 stars or something.
Yeah.
And so that's one example. But the point of what you're saying, Mike, is that I think people are looking to someone else to form their own opinion, to pre-chew their entertainment for them. And here's the example I was going to give. In 2019, I'll never forget this. So I went with my friend. Actually, Roop, you met him.
Yeah.
And it was he and I, his girlfriend, and then someone else that I was seeing at the time. And so we saw this film. It's called Boots Riley, Sorry to Bother You. And I saw it and I loved it. It's still probably in the last
That's a new movie.
2018.
Yeah.
In the last 5-10 years.
I haven't seen it, but I heard it's good.
It's it's still, for let's say a Western film, top 5, easy. Just it's so many different parts about it, how creative it was, and anyways, whatever, right? And we watched the film, and there are other differences that we could get into that that
'cause it's a little political,
that myself and Roop, we have let's say some lived experiences they did not, that immediately we turned and we're like I had goosebumps. I'm like, this is a fantastic film. Anyways, we didn't say anything, but the 2 other people that were there, they were they just paused. They didn't know what to think. They're like,
yeah.
And then they turn and what did you think? And I'm like, I don't know. What did you? I said, I know what I thought. I'm like, what did you think?
Yeah.
And that is a common experience where people, because unless they're pre-chewed, and so they go to Rotten Tomatoes and then they precondition what I expect, and then they'll enjoy it therefore because they've been told it's a good film, they're uncomfortable challenging themselves or wondering about it.
I don't know where it sits, but you and I did a podcast back in the day that stuck with my head because we did so many podcasts so shortly that not many stick in my head.
Love it.
You know what I mean? Because we were just fucking, we were hauling ass. And I don't know where this fits in, but it does fit in with kind of a culture vulture thing, right? The trends and just being a culture vulture, meaning just following a trend because it's a trend rather than following a trend because you respect its history, its tradition, quality, or simply because it's kind of like working out, where I just say if you say you like it, or if you say that feels good, I'm never going to argue. I was even just joking with Dan the other day about foam rolling. He's like, I'm surprised you don't foam roll a lot. I was like, it's trash. And he's like, but it feels good. I was like, keep foam rolling, bucko. What do I care? And that's with a lot of things. I don't care if you like this or don't like that shoe or like this. As long as you say, I like that, I enjoy this, fucking party on the rest of your life. I'll never argue someone that says, I have fun with it, it feels good, or I like this.
Yeah.
Because then I can just never argue. And that's the same with movies. That's the same with music. That's the same with clothes. But everyone just follows trends, and they just follow it. Everyone's wearing Jordan 1s now just because your favorite influencer is wearing Jordan 1s where you know nothing about sneakers, and you might not even like them. Yeah.
Sidestepping into a conversation that's been going on our Discord, a couple months ago, around Thanksgiving, we had Avi and Seabass, our 20-somethings, in here. and we reviewed Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Oh, yeah. Did you watch it live at the same time?
No, we didn't, but we everybody watched it the day before, and then we just talked about it.
Love it.
But to see like what the generational issues around it were, and there's some things you couldn't get away with in that film now. There's there's all kinds of stuff. But someone on our Discord said, basically, if you can't appreciate a classic film, like a well-regarded classic film,
you don't know
as a
shit
young
gonna do.
person, then you're stupid.
Yeah. They did put it in nicer words, but I felt that as well when I read it. And that goes back to, and I think you guys could back me up on this, like, I just like what I like. Yeah. Like, fuck you. Like, it could be a piece of art.
Yeah.
And if I don't like it, that's not a knock on the artist. Well, I don't like it.
I started to respond, and I looked at the films that he named that, were classics. And I thought, okay, were all of those actually popular at the time?
Like Omar's thing with Sandow, kind of.
Yeah, like were they popular at the time? And did they make money? Were they, like in the top ranks of films that were seen in that year? Like Apocalypse Now wasn't, but all the other ones I think had something. But it was not because they were classic films that they did well at the time. It's because they fit the cultural zeitgeist at the time.
Right.
Like it matched what people's sensibilities were relative to movies that they wanted to see, and not because they were classic. They were also classic, but that's something different. And if you're going to appreciate that, appreciate something from an earlier age, you have to appreciate it based on that classic part and not on the cultural zeitgeist, because it changes. That changes all the time.
I think movie and music are two things that you can really light up with that. Like Iron Man 1's going to go down as a classic. Is it the greatest cinematic film adventure ever? No. But it hit that string at the right time.
And
there's something special about that as well.
There were 14, 15-year-old kids playing basketball at the court that's right by my house, and they were fucking blasting Van Halen and just a bunch of like 70s, 80s stuff. And they're like, well, it's because that's classic, but it also vibes with me.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, some they can be different, and they don't all have to be that.
Yeah,
they don't all have to last the tail of time. It's okay for it to be a classic in its time, and a certain group enjoy these 1950 films or whatever. But it's okay that they're not God send now too. It's okay that our taste as a culture has moved on. As also,
it helps if you understand like why things are constructed way they are and stuff like that. I mean, I took film classes and stuff like that, so like I get that.
And you can still not like it, and it's
you can still
okay
not
for you to like it, and a 12-year-old now would be like, why is that a classic?
Yeah, Jim, there's so much to unpack. We're like, no, like, truly. I think what I would say is that great art, and we would need to define that, because I think there's an upper pantheon, and I would not put Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in that category. But
this guy kind of did, right, in Discord?
But I would put
a little bit,
yeah. Where I was like, dude,
I'm like, hey, I would ask him as an example. I would go even more elitist. I'm like, hey, where's Andrei Rublev? Like Andrei Tarkovsky's film. It's like, how do you deal with international cinema? Like Akira Kurosawa. Do we have Ron in there? Do we have like Shinichiro Samurai? Do we have like Seven Samurai?
Yeah, probably not.
Like, right, it's like, so your experience, I think what I would say this is that great art, we need to define that, and that's a nebulous term, but let's just go with it. What you think about great art is more a reflection on you than the art itself, but the beauty about art is an interaction between you and the art, and it's okay, to Mike's point, for someone not to feel a certain way about a film that ostensibly or a piece of music they should, and everyone's also on their own journey. And I do not believe in gatekeeping, and I don't believe in policing people's thoughts in terms of what they should like, because I'll give you an example. Let's take a look at, and I don't know what like Avi and like Seabass and like everyone thought about the film, but like Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, if we're using this as the kind of example right here, is a film that takes place in a very particular time period that speaks to, it does have universal appeal, and we could go spoiler here, right? Spoiler.
Yeah.
The turnaround ending that reframes it is the best part about the film, about John Candy with his wife, and then Steve Martin, where they're theoretically like one's blue collar, one's white collar, that they come together, and it's this unification. It's a great like American like cultural mythos of like Thanksgiving and what it's about, right? And it appeals. It's very like middle America in its message, and that's what you said. Like
it's niched within a niche, because it doesn't even like hit like modern day California. The only reason I even got some of it is because like Dad's from the Midwest, like it's so like
and to hit to that individual's pocket, it really speaks to them, and that's cool. I think more often than not, films could be an empathy building vehicle. and that's fantastic, which puts you outside of your own experience. But all too often, which is understood, people want to see themselves or stories that are reflected. It's like, so that example, it's like, if we analyze that's a John Hughes film, and they have like, I think if he wanted to use a better example, probably like the othering that occurs being a youth, like in something like The Breakfast Club, in terms of like these, in quotations, delinquents, the youth that's always perpetually misunderstood by the establishment. That's like a more universal. There's a reason why that's like the teen film. But
or the Goonies.
But Mike, nonetheless, the whole example with what that person brought up is that, just like with music, and I could give some heavy musical examples, and like I was going to give this example about Wayne Shorter, one of the greatest saxophone players of all time. Just like your experience is predicated upon your exposure, and everyone's exposure is different, and their opportunity and time to think about things. I'll put it this way: I've orchestrated my life in such a way that I have ample opportunities to read the books I want to read, to discover myself more, to watch the films I want, to listen to the music, to think about these things. I'm fortunate; I have the privilege and access. My brother, who's like, he is the greatest musician I know. He can listen to a piece and he can identify the chord progression within 3 seconds, and he's given me a seismic forward progress in terms of my musical understanding. All those things come together to then form, like, I'll talk about like a certain album, I'll talk about like Jaco Pastorius or whatnot, and someone's like, oh, who's Jaco? And I wouldn't take the like, you don't know who he is.
Yeah.
It's the hours that I've been afforded, not the hours I've chosen to dedicate.
Yeah, you're like me in that sense. You're like excited then to share that.
Yes.
Rather than, like you said, like gatekeepy or like
I don't like
tyke. I hate it too.
And because what it is you're essentially attempting to bully people to conform to your worldview. Because if that person brought up, like, I don't know what films they said we can all agree. I think there'd basically be very few films, and think we're taking on a very Western perspective here. Probably with the films, I'm assuming, like, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know this person.
Yeah,
but
we don't either.
Many of them are North American films.
Yeah.
It's all American stuff.
So let's agree. So let's talk about Mike's Italian. Let's talk about the beauty of Italian neorealism
or
film,
women.
Okay? Or anything. Sophia Loren, Monica Bellucci, come on.
Love them.
But let's talk about Italian neorealism film, okay? So let's talk about La Strada, okay? Let's talk about like Fellini's La Strada, one of the all-time greats. Let's talk about Bicycle Thieves, or my film, what do you call it? There's many we could go on. Umberto D, I was going to say, which is like, that's one of the greatest. But that guy, what he listed, think about this. So he listed only Western films. Can we agree that cinema as a medium, there's a learning period, like there's the silent era over here in the West, where, like, first 20 years, like 1918, Charlie Chaplin is one of the goats, but like one of the goats, but he is, but of the silent era, I do think he's undefeated in the silent era. But the point is, there's a learning period, but there's so many different, there's European cinema, there's Asian cinema, there's like, you go over like African cinema and so on and so forth. But it's like, if you listed just American films, you're slicing off 90% of the rest of the world. My favorite film in the last 10 years, it's a Colombian film, Embrace of the Serpent.
Hola.
That deals with like the indigenous, like Indians, I believe they're called, like just their history and everything else. It's beautiful. But anyways, the point is that his assumption that what he shared is the thing, that assumption
that a generation's missing.
Yeah, I would.
Maybe you're missing something, right? And maybe it's okay for them. Like, here's a question for you: did they vibe with it? They thought what? Like, some parts were funny. I do assume that, I would say, Hollywood filmmaking in the last 30 years, every decade has gotten faster. So instead of, let's say,
he talks about that a little bit too in his comment.
Yeah, there's 40 jokes.
Jim did too about pacing
in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. In a modern film like that, there'd be 300, or whatever, right?
Yeah, but Planes, Trains, there's a little bit of a more modern aesthetic there, and you're talking about the end. I mean, there's multiple endings to that film.
Shot.
Yeah, I mean, like they cut like 40 minutes of that film toward the end. There's a whole other story about John Candy's character's life and stuff that they just stripped it out. There are pieces of this movie that don't make any sense because of the connective tissue that was removed. But they were editing for pacing, and length.
And I don't think that's a bad thing either. I again, I don't want to rip this homie in Discord because it's just his perspective, and that's all fair. But when he like kind of names that it's all Western, and he names that the pacing is ruining modern movies. But if I like modern movies, why is it ruining it?
Yeah.
Like it is again, and I do think we could come on a definition of what a good art is in relation to a medium we're talking about. There are some aspects where it's not subjective, right? Like you can't just do whatever you want in movies, music, and more
Yeah,
drawings.
like if you're atonal music. Like,
right. Yeah, arrhythmic even. Like there's got to be some kind of form with the syncopation.
You can't keep the beat.
Now it's not music, right?
Yeah.
So there are some rules in each medium. But what says a higher pace for the modern era is bad?
Yeah.
Because that's what the people want. And part of art is to communicate to an audience, right? Like art isn't made for you. Art is made for an audience. And so there needs to be some level of communication there. And if the modern era needs a faster pace based on whatever you want to make, ADHD, 5G phones, I don't care what your excuse is, then communicate that way. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Well,
you just prefer the classic take.
But at the same time, movies are fucking getting longer and longer
right.
and longer.
Yeah.
So the
podcasts, we've talked about this a lot, where the attention span is actually just splitting. It's not going shorter. TikTok's the shit with 5 seconds, but so is podcasts with 3 hours.
Yep.
Yeah. Not us though. We don't do 3 hours. I mean,
3 hours is an epic journey.
I don't even know.
Apocalypse Now.
That's
the final cut.
That's 50% extended take. Lord of the Rings version.
Yeah, I don't even think. No, there's no way. The way he actually listed: Lawrence of Arabia, The Graduate, Chinatown, Apocalypse Now.
Thank you. Let me rip them apart. So Lawrence of Arabia, being someone from another background, let me just say that the story of Lawrence of Arabia is ass backwards.
Yeah, it's totally not true.
It's totally not. But he loved it because it's David Lean. It's cinematic, the splendor. You have Omar Sharif, right? Who's there? Anyways, not only is it not historically accurate and it's not true to the source material, but it's a fantasy. The way it's the way it is, the way it's paced and told is something that probably that individual would identify with, but none of it's true. And even the way it's told, like that's the point, is like, let's say, so Apocalypse Now we could talk about, where what was interesting about 70s filmmakers and what I would support with Francis Ford Coppola, he was trying to get to the truth of the story of what happened in Vietnam. So his aim was to tell something that was true. David Lean's, on the other hand, it's like a how do you say, a grandiose epic that is just concocted in someone's head. And there's an asymmetry of power there if you think about it, because the people, the Arabians that he's speaking about, they don't have any voice in it. He didn't consult any of them for historical accuracy.
No.
So he's just putting his own perspective to other people, and this person's chewing it up.
Which is fine.
Yeah.
Right? But yeah, it's not accurate.
And Lawrence is a very flawed character in the film and also in real life.
Yeah.
And I mean, hero but not in a lot of ways, and the film portrays him more as more of a hero than he really was, and even
the British liberating them. I'm like, British liberated people. I'm like, I don't think that's how it works.
Yeah, that's not really how that worked out.
But that's interesting. So Jim, see, even that I find, I'll take right on, because I say to him, I'm like, hey, where's Larissa Shapiko, like one of my favorite films of all time. I do think, like, if we talk high art, I'm like, you've never even seen that film. It's like that film can bring anyone to tears. I'll give you a story actually, Jim, because not that's fired me up, but just the films he's listed.
You stay fired up. You can't get fired up.
I will tell you a story here that's one of my most powerful, because I believe art should be accessible to everyone. So at TIFF, Toronto International Film Festival, there's now a building gym. And so they'll house like all the film, like any artistic film of, in quotations, merit will play there. Cool. So they'll play some of the classics sometimes, right? Whatever. And so my favorite director is Andrei Tarkovsky. So I identify with a lot of different things. Like, anyways, it's not worth getting into. But he has a film called Andrei Rublev that was about someone who painted icons, which are like the religious paintings. But there's so much more to that. It's a 4-hour film. For a modern viewer, it goes at a glacier pace. Mm-hmm. Anyways, it's one of my favorite films, easily of all time. It's listed by serious hardcore film critics. Like, if we're to look it up right now, it's always at the top something. Cool, whatever, right? And so film students will make it a point when it's playing, they want to go see it. But here's the interesting part. So it was playing Cinema One, biggest cinema at TIFF, right? Because, of course, it is that film. It has this, like, artistic prestige associated with it. What's that era? So in the 60s, late 60s, won all the awards, like I think the Venice like Gold Line or whatever. Anyways, so they show it, and who shows up? 10 film students and this older Slavic woman who is dressed very plainly, simply. She's not a film student. She's not a film critic. I could easily tell just by the way that she is that she's just someone that probably grew up in Russia, because I heard her after on the phone. Like, it totally was like a Russian accent. Anyways, when I saw the film, these 10 art students sit down, and like I said, because I think they didn't know what to expect, and it's so outside of their periphery of experience, where they were given like a list of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the spiritual and philosophical tones that Tarkovsky deals with, and it's all, a lot of it's metaphorical, it's poetic in the way his father was a poet. Anyways, there's a lot to unpack, but it flies over their head. The film ends, and I'll never forget this, but the woman was crying. And it was a beautiful moment where like it penetrated to her. So this theoretically complex, intellectually complex work that's one of the masterworks of all time that you really need to think about, understood. It penetrated her soul because the message was fundamental. She had an openness about it, whereas all the art students, every single one of them,
who hypothetically should be speaking the same language as the director,
that should have known.
Yep.
Not only did they understand it, they started saying these platitudes. Well, I think it was very interesting. They started using words and phrases that meant that either, one, they didn't understand, which is fine to say you didn't understand it, but also they didn't like it. But they should, because they're art students, right? And this is like the greatest art film of all time.
So they're intellectualizing it and they're really kind of...
Yeah.
Robert Bresson, one of the greatest French filmmakers, said this. He said, I want my audience to feel a film and not think about it.
Yeah.
And he's and these films are heavy. Like Andrei Tarkovsky, he has this book. It's one of the books I brought with me called Sculpting in Time, which is one of the greatest philosophical works on art in the 20th century that he wrote. Talks about this, that he said consciousness and content must come before technique is one of the things that he said. But anyways, the point of me saying that is that I believe art should be accessible to everyone, and there's a lack of gatekeeping there. With that person who saw the film, it immediately resonated with him. My brother had the exact same experience where he saw Akira Kurosawa's Ron, a film the guy made it in his 70s. Like Kurosawa was one of the goats. And because he was a painter, he made many black and white films. One of his first 3 or 4 films in color. Beautiful. And there was an older lady next to my brother. He sat right at the front. And at the end, there's a moment, I'll just say, no spoilers at the end, but there's a sound cue that will startle the audience because everything's quiet. And the woman jumped next to him, and she turned. They're from totally different life experiences, everything. She's 50 years older than my brother, and she turned to him and said, "That's a wonderful film." And that's the power of art. And that's why the seemingly unassuming person that doesn't have the pretense is an easier path to understanding art. And that says something about this, about people that identify themselves as critics or people that will try and police other people's thoughts. I'm not trying to critique that person, but just that Lawrence of Arabia, I guarantee in 100 years that film will be forgotten. Yeah. Besides for its cinematic splendor in terms of being a spectacle.
Yeah. It's an incredible spectacle.
It's sumptuous.
It's like, wow. Yeah. But Apocalypse Now isn't. I mean, it's supposed to be about the Vietnam War, but it's really not. It's a parable.
Yeah.
And I think that if you start to think about all of scripted entertainment as being a parable for a particular point of view, you're trying to say a particular thing, you find the kind of distance that you need to talk about how the story is told and not what the actual underlying meaning of the story is. I'm fascinated by sequels to things because I just want to see how they're going to work out the puzzle of extending a story that seemed over.
Yeah, it seems
even if it's shitty, you know. I mean, or television adaptations of movies, all that stuff. I just want to see how they do it. And to me, every one of them is some kind of a parable. They're telling you a story in a particular way to get a certain reaction or to give you a certain insight that they feel that they can get. You know, I've been completely fascinated by the adaptation of The Last of Us, not versus the game, although I hear about that, but how does it fit into that sort of apocalyptic genre? How it fits into the zombie horrors genre, and go on.
No, I know. We actually just
played footsie on accident.
Now we have a foot fetish with each other.
Okay.
I like zombie movies for that same reason, to see the origin story, for lack of a better term, of when we're all gonna die.
Mike likes to think it's all going to be over at some point, and so
the mushroom is a little scary.
It is.
I heard it's 3 evolutions away from that truth. I don't know if that's true either, but have you watched Last of Us?
No,
because that's a couple. There's a couple things that I do like too, where there's certain movies or series where the kind of film student, the casual fan, and the historian or whatever, all demographics are, all agree this is fucking lit. And I feel like Last of Us is starting to get there, where the visual folks are cinematically it's amazing. The story folks are and the casual fan like me is that's fucking dope.
I think there's a lot of very good. I think
Game of Thrones beginnings were kind of like that.
I think Hollywood cinema has been static. There's still some good, but I think most of the best films are outside of that. Whereas I think television adaptations have been getting better and better.
Right.
By and
Yeah,
large.
I agree.
By and large,
I heard the Lord of the Rings. Was it Power of the Ring or something?
Rings of Power.
Yeah, I heard it was
Power.
good. I didn't watch it yet.
That. Anyways, I mean,
it was fine.
So what I would say is that it's so Jim. This is an interesting conversation where Tolkien. His work. So basically, Mordor. This is what's so cool. Is there was, I believe he's Russian. He's a Russian writer that reframed it. That what if it was told from Mordor's perspective? It's English. Yeah. The retelling. You understand what I'm saying? No, I'm saying that the original is. Oh no, 100%. No, I'm saying the guy, the writer, is taking the perspective from Mordor.
Yeah.
Oh, not of Rings of Power. No,
I've heard this as well.
So
yeah.
I'm saying J.R.R. Tolkien, he told a story, and basically it's a parable for a lot of different things, but the division of the world, essentially Mordor and what we're talking about with Gondor, it's Constantinople, Istanbul.
Yeah.
If you look at the men of Far Harad and Near Harad, when they talk about it and the cultural like purview and whatnot, they're all basically like Arabs or like they're supposed to be Africans.
Yeah.
They get like conscripted. So it's told from his world view where like the West is the best and like they say, and that's interesting. And that's why George R.R. Martin inverts a lot of that, which is what's interesting about his work. But what I was going to say, the interesting one is that someone else like a fanfic by the Slavic dude wrote it's like, what if Mordor, because we need constantly the othering of some sort of enemy, what if it's told from their perspective where that's all essentially propaganda?
Yeah,
because
and the elves were enemies.
Yeah, and all nation states have this where they have to have that shared agreement of what happened
Common
historically,
enemy.
right? So you need that's other that we don't know anything about, right? And that's where things like Game of Thrones gets interesting. But if we want to talk about Tolkien for a second, is the Silmarillion, which is like the first age with the Noldor and so on and so forth, and Morgoth, were some very
You're a
fascinating
nerd.
things. I could go all the way, man.
You know the only other nerd that goes as hard as you?
Who?
Who's very intellectual? Simon. Aesthetics.
Oh yeah, no,
Simon goes hard on Lord of the Rings.
You want to hear something? I sunned him,
Yeah.
and I'll say that here because he on Facebook because I said something. He thought I wasn't about the Silmarillion because I said a reference, and I went because it's real timer conversation. I just dunked on him because and you know what's funny is because I'm interested, and that's why I like Jim, like cinema. I know what it's like growing up in the West. I've read the greatest Western cultural works.
Yeah.
So I'm familiar with the fantasy, the sci-fi. I want to learn about everywhere else.
Right.
And so I think having a plethora of ideas is always healthy. But the point of what I was going to say is the Silmarillion's fascinating. The Lord of the Rings as books, and then Peter Jackson's adaptations stand apart. And there's some hardcore J.R.R. Tolkien fans that don't like some of the film adaptations, which is fine. I think they're very good. But the Rings of Power is like a further extension into the Peter Jackson style, and then some. And just the way that it was told, which is so like I didn't know that was Gilgalad. Like I didn't like it didn't register a lot of the things in my head of who the characters were supposed to be and how they were telling, and that's completely fine. But I think the difference with the Rings of Power, Last of Us, new piece of work. It's a video game. It doesn't have this 100-year history, so it doesn't have as much baggage. It's the care and attention you bring to the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the one I question about Rings of Power, or even that's why with the new Star Wars, what made me so sad about them, because I do regard like Empire Strikes Back fantastic, like New Hope, so on and so forth, is that there was no clear intention behind them.
Yeah.
Like, I think George Lucas with the prequels, he knew the story he wanted to tell. He didn't execute it, but there's a story there. There is a Shakespearean tragedy. Like the beats are there. Like ba 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 ba. Here's the plot. Okay. And they didn't have an agreed upon what the new trilogy would be about, which is unfathomable. That you're taking over a multi-billion-dollar franchise.
And didn't know what they were doing. I will say that Andor is kind of the best thing that's come out of the Disney ownership of Lucasfilm era. For me personally, I fucking loved it. It was amazing TV, and it really set up the whole why are people rebelling? Why were people rebelling at the beginning, and in a way that the first trilogy did not.
And that see, I would have to watch that because this is what happens.
I haven't watched it either.
It's what is it? The Boy Who Cried Wolf style, where I've consumed now so much Star Wars content, like new Star Wars content.
Yeah.
Not only have I become jaded, but it's made the world feel so. The best part about world building when it's done successfully is that the world seems infinite, right? When you start exploring and thinking about wow, I wonder about this, I wonder about this place, I wonder about this, who's Boba Fett? And then they start answering some of these intangibles and the world feels smaller and smaller because not only is it predictable, but it's poorly executed. So my buy-in for new Star Wars material has degraded, unfortunately, over time. But I did like what you're saying, man.
I liked Obi.
It was fine. It
Yeah, I
just
like
wasn't.
Obi.
It was not on a level of, I don't know. It there are things about it that bothered me. I liked seeing Ewan McGregor back, and
Yeah, he was
that's
good.
kind of that's sort of the beginning and ending of it. To go back to your point about Rings of Power, though,
I pieced out after the second or third episode.
really, I watched the whole thing, but like an important point, I think that in adaptation is that in all the previous versions, Mordor is just there, and like this is just how this part of the world is. In Rings of Power, it's created for a reason. It's created because this Adar guy is trying to protect the orcs from the sun. Basically, he was trying to create a homeland for the orcs so they could walk around during the day.
Just like an evolutionary sense.
Yeah, it's like, oh well, that seems motivated.
Yeah.
That I get that. That's like that was probably the maybe the smartest moment of adaptation in that whole thing.
Yeah.
But no, I like it was fine. It was fine. I was more comfortable with it than I was with the Game of Thrones extension.
Yeah. See, that I'll eventually work because I read a lot of fantasy like in my youth, and then I will eventually work my way towards it. Not that I don't like unfinished works. Like this guy Nikolai Gogol, he has this book Dead Souls that is worth a read, but he literally died before it was completed.
Oh shit.
Oh.
And I do have something because I like to see the full circle moment
Right.
of a work, and the fact that he hasn't finished Game of Thrones, and so you'll be left not on it's fine to be left on a cliffhanger, but I want to understand the musical whole. There's a lot of things. There's like there's a song by Coltrane like Giant Steps that when you hear the ending in it really frames what transpired before. And so I think for a lot of people, they want to see what happens. Right. And so if this guy's on it's like book 4 of like 7 or book 5 or whatever the amount, and it might because he's like 70 now or he's like 80. He's like,
what now?
Are you going to complete it? I'm like, I don't know. So that's my only hesitation.
I don't think he wants to. I think that's part of the problem. I think it got hard, and especially with the series getting beyond what was already written down.
Yeah, now you got so many eyes on you.
Yeah,
it's a different pressure to create.
Yeah, well, and the whole end of Game of Thrones sucked balls.
Well, you know what's funny though, Jim? I think that's, as far as I understand, I haven't looked into this at all because I'm like, for Game of Thrones, super casual. Like, I think those are the major beats that he wanted. It's not the way it was told.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Where Jon Snow's that perpetual like doesn't want to be king, will not be king, is comfortable just in the wilderness, retreating into himself. So on and so forth, and Daenerys was always a flawed character. That's I like all the women that identified or men that identified with Daenerys like that. Like she's my queen. I'm like she's a flawed character.
Yeah, she's out of her brain.
Yeah. It's how they portrayed her downfall that was too quick and didn't make sense. But that's why I
it
wonder,
was just all rushed.
I wonder. Like I think by and large, like the points or like what was it called? The dude in the north that wore that was over like that. Like it was the silliest thing ever.
Yeah. And it was it was a 6-season build up for a 10-minute fight.
Yeah, and then the plot armor the people had were like this guy. Like, anyways, yeah, we don't have to dissect that. There's time, but I do wonder about people when you consume so much content, and then not that it makes you jaded, but like who's the content for then?
Yeah,
and that's what I was gonna say about the Star Wars. Like, if people enjoy it, and it's their Star Wars, and like even like the new trilogy, it's fine. Like, I'm not gonna be like you're a loser for believing that. It's okay.
The first one and the second one first one and the third one suck, and I thought the second one sucked until I gave it a little space, went back to it. It's like, okay, actually, this is really good.
The Last Jedi.
I forgot the names.
Yeah, Last Jedi.
Last Jedi.
No.
That's
yes,
the one
Last
with,
Jedi. That Ryan Johnson. Yeah.
So I'm gonna be honest. Is that I'm gonna agree with Jim. I thought the first one was way too much of a retread.
Yeah,
and the characters were uninspired.
They had to do it to fucking get the 12-year-olds in the Star Wars.
And that's what they say. But so here's the thing. So I'm going deep now because let's go into Star Wars for a second here. KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. Obsidian Entertainment made the second one. Has some of the best besides like the legendary like extended like book universe.
Yeah,
Star Wars characters and ideas, which shows you could tell new, viable stories that bring something not only new to the table but feel like Star Wars. Like KOTOR, probably to me, Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 is the most Star Wars feeling thing. Besides, I haven't watched like Andor and whatnot. Besides like the original trilogy, so it's possible. So I don't like laziness. The second one, I thought it was interesting where he tried to invert and subvert expectations. And I thought he was dealing. I think killing Snoke was actually not a bad idea because Snoke was once again just a built-up mythical character that meant nothing. So at least he tried something new, and then the third one was, I think the third one's dumpster fire, personally. The first one, will, if you're kind of just like watching it for entertainment, you could take something, and then 2, it's like, oh, there's some like maybe new ideas. How are they executed, and then like what are the greater implications? But I'm actually confident due to the response and because there's large corporate heads thinking about this and thinking about future profits, that they'll probably like retcon that trilogy within 20-30 years, I think.
Yeah,
they said they won't, but I think they will.
I think that they will too. Another example from the science fiction genre, Star Trek.
Yeah.
You know, they brought Picard back, and it is a follow up to the Next Generation. You know, the most successful Star Trek period, and then the 4 movies or whatever didn't have a good ending because the last movie sucked balls because people thought, oh, we need to do something super dramatically different and it needs to be like this and whatever, and it was awful. And the first 2 seasons of Picard are the same story. Like, oh, we need to not go back to the original characters that everybody loved. We need to create new characters from fucking scratch and underwrite them and have all these tremendous plot holes and make dramatic changes to the main character that are unmotivated, just to throw shit against the wall to see if something will stick. And then I actually just saw the first episode of the 3rd season, which is the last.
I'm working my way through Picard season 1. Go on.
Yeah, it sucks balls. Anyway, and not 100% sucks balls. There are things that are good about it, but the 3rd one is like, okay, this is what we should have done in the first place. This is what people actually wanted to see.
So sorry, the 3rd season, episode 1, good actually?
Yeah, very good.
Because you know what I was going to say, Jim. So I am a Star Trek fan. My favorite one actually, low-key, is Deep Space Nine. Yeah. You know why? Like I don't know how deep. Like, so one thing I'll say, I do have to use the washroom a little bit. I know I'm saying that.
We can wrap her up.
But this is some cool shit to talk about. Is that because I think Deep Space Nine, you know the treatment Michael Straczynski, he wrote for Babylon 5, and they totally did take a lot of the plot points.
They just ripped it right off.
That were very different for the Star Trek, but I think it's good because, let's be honest, the Federation is analogous to America in terms of like how they're and the way they saw it. And Deep Space Nine added complexity where there's the Cardassians, which were clear, like basically every other alien species is not as good as the Federation. And even the Vulcans, who are intellectually superior, are emotionally dead. So there's always a flaw. Yeah. It's kind of like you play an RPG, and the human race is always like the default.
Perfect medium.
Yeah. Everyone else, like elves, are like, well, like if it's like Morrowind or whatnot, like they're smart, but like physically weak. Right. So humans are the standard. So Deep Space Nine changed a lot of things, expanded it, deepened the lore. They made Klingons as an example, the whole thing of like Martok and like Worf. Worf became a 3D character. Worf in so Next Generation, to me, like they're both exceptional in their own different way. But like Worf was the Wolverine of that series, where Intruder would come, be like, "Arr!" Go to strike it, get smoked, and that's it. Yeah. And they never established, and someone had a compilation of season 1. It's amazing. Where like they never established, because he's supposed to be this big, fearsome, what do you call it, Klingon, that he never like won any battles, so you never got the sense that he was this formidable like warrior, which is hilarious. But anyways, so DS9, love what they did, and they showed that there was more room to grow, and that's why Voyager, like to me, like Voyager's flawed in many ways. DS9 was almost a pinnacle where they even brought in a religious, spiritual, which was very interesting, almost like Frank Herbert-esque with the Bajorans and the what do you call it, the wormhole. Very cool. And then the Dominion. So the Borg are an existential threat, where they never really fleshed them really out. Like they're like just assimilation, resistance is futile. Whereas the Dominion, it was a power play that's predicated upon they were not the solids, the changelings, that they were always persecuted. So their next logical thought in their head was that to never be persecuted, we must control everything. Which, if you follow down, like it kind of like logically makes sense. So the Dominion's intriguing. The whole Next Generation and DS9 are rich for sci-fi stories, and so I was holding out on Picard. I've only watched a few episodes, but what I'd say, Jim, my new attitude, that's what I was just going to come back to. After all this new media, sequels, and so on and so forth, I have divested myself, bro, of being emotionally invested in any of it. that I'm watching it as an incredibly casual consumer.
Yeah.
And I'm such a big fan of Patrick Stewart and Jean-Luc Picard. I think Cisco and him are like the GOAT captains. I think like Kirk sucked, and like Janeway was good. But what I was gonna say is that just to see Picard on screen again is refreshing to me, and the idea to see them reunited, even if they're like, they're changing his character and he's like that guy curmudgeon at the end of his days and like whatever.
Yeah, it could be fun. It could be fun.
If I was trying to critically analyze it, I would completely feel different, and I feel some type of way. And I'll say that, spoiler alert, about Nemesis, Data was my favorite character on Next Generation. They did such a disservice with his ending, like how he came to his end.
Yeah.
It could have been so emotionally poignant. And so that's why they're almost trying to revisit that, obviously, on Picard, where his relationship with Data and all the episodes, bro, where Picard was ready to peace out of the Federation. See, those parts make sense, where he's like, belay that order to the Admiral, where he was willing to stand up for his friend Data to prove that he was, in fact, a sentient, like he was worthy of being treated like a sentient being, and that his feelings and thoughts were valid. Beautiful stuff.
Measure of a Man.
Yeah. Yes, the episode Measure of a Man.
Yeah.
Jim, you understand? No, those are, yeah, go on, sorry.
I get it. No. Yeah, I think that, oh my God, what was it? I was right on the verge of saying something important. I'm going to just let it go and say, bring us back, because I have to pee too. Bring it back to the beginning of this. We talked about there being no weight classes in the jungle.
Thank you.
However, mosquitoes
Yes.
carry dengue fever.
That's true.
And
they're very small.
Yes, and they're very small. And the virus is even smaller, right?
True.
And it kicks a lot of ass. So in some ways, there aren't no weight classes in the jungle.
I like that. I like to end it. It's like, yeah, you think you're the strongest one. I'm like, that thing will kill you in a heartbeat.
True.
Yeah.
True. Where can people find you, buddy?
50% facts.
Nice.
I'm here once every several years, but I'll try and make it more frequent.
That'd
yeah.
be nice.
Yeah, monthly.
Yeah.
Who knows? Ladies and gentlemen, new episode Wednesday, Friday. Check us out, 3sb.co for all your clothing. Goodcompanydiscord.com if you want to join the conversation. Automatic link to our Discord, so join that. And I'm Silent Mike, where you want me to find me.
I'm at the Jim McDonald on all the social media. The show is 50% Facts, where percent is a word and 50 is just numbers. 50% Facts is a Spreaker Prime podcast in association with iHeartMedia on the Obscure Celebrity Network. And we'll talk to you Friday.